Welcome back to another episode of Evoke Greatness. Today's guest is someone whose voice, work, and leadership have helped shape some of the most important conversations happening in workplaces right now. I'm delighted to welcome Minda Harts to the Evoke Greatness podcast. Minda is a best-selling author, speaker, and workplace equity expert who has spent her career advocating for women, especially women of color, to have the conversations that move careers and cultures forward. You may know her from her powerful books as the author of The Memo and Right Within and You Are More Than Magic, or from her work advising organizations on how to build more honest, inclusive, and human workplaces. Today, I'm excited to share that we're diving into her newest book, Talk to Me Nice, The 7 Trust Languages for a Better Workplace, which centers on something so many of us struggle with but rarely name clearly: communication. How we talk to each other, how we advocate for ourselves, how we set boundaries, ask for what we need, and still lead with integrity and respect. This conversation is about having the courage to speak up, the wisdom to choose your words intentionally, and the power that comes from learning how to be heard without losing yourself in the process. Minda brings both truth and tenderness to these topics, and I know this conversation will leave you reflecting, challenged, and better equipped to navigate the rooms you're in. So, Minda, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Honored to be here with you.
Well, I always like to go backwards a little bit before we kind of talk about your current story, right? Like, so many times we get to this place, and the part of the story, part of the magic is actually how we got to the place, to our current reality. You've built a career around helping people have conversations that change outcomes. What personal or professional moment first showed you just how costly silence can be?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. I would say personal experience definitely lends the work that I do today. I think when I entered into my corporate role, I was just happy to be there, like many of us when we get our first jobs and you're making a little bit of money, and sometimes you laugh at things that actually make you want to cry, right? Or you know that you're not being paid the same as some of your colleagues and you're going above and beyond, and I started to see that meritocracy wasn't created equal for everybody, and
Mhm.
if I don't say anything, then that's a cost, right? And if I do say something about it, then that's a cost too. And so I decided to sweep those things under the rug for at least 12 years, and it started to impact like my mental health. Anxiety was high and all of these different things just because I was accepting a lot of behaviors that I had normalized that other people were exhibiting. And I realized that I can be part of the solution or continue to help perpetuate bad behaviors in the workplace. And when it started to
Mhm.
really impact my well being to where the point where I was having panic attacks inside of meetings because of being bullied in the workplace, I realized that I had a responsibility to make the workplace better than I found it. And it was at that kind of crossroads moment where I was crying in my car. Maybe some of your listeners have had those moments where you're just like, this what it takes to get the gold watch at the end of the day? I don't want it if it's going to be like this. And I realized that I had more power than I thought I did. And if I could help one person, including myself, then it was worth the journey. And so it was in that moment in the car where I said, work can be better. It doesn't have to be like this.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because that really resonates with a situation I was in recently where it made me reflect back on my career and my life.
Hmm.
And I was in a situation where people were saying some things that all of a sudden it became so clear to me that I am unwilling to do the obligatory laugh or the sort of showing that maybe you're not in favor of it, but not opposed to it.
Hmm.
And I just thought, I am too old and too far along in my career to be in a situation where I do that. And so my choice is to exit this conversation altogether. I don't have to make it comfortable. Matter of fact, my exit probably made it uncomfortable. And I think that in itself is a statement too.
It's revolutionary, right? Because we're saying we do have a choice. And I think sometimes we've told ourselves a story that we don't, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. To get to, anytime you're inside of a company, and sometimes it's a little bit perception. I think back in my career of what do I feel like I need to do to continue growing and climbing? And sometimes it's what people put out there as these are not necessarily perceptions, but kind of these are the realities if you want to grow or if you want to do this, that, and the other. And I think that's why I love conversations like this because these are empowering when we give people, and they shouldn't need permission, but sometimes they need to hear that you don't have to be the obligatory laugh. You don't have to stick around in those situations. Matter of fact, what would it look like to continue to grow in that kind of environment? Is that what you really want?
And that's a cost, right? There's a
Right? Yes.
sacrifice involved in that. And it also signals to other people that you're okay with this, right? And maybe I always say that my voice is tied to someone else's freedom. So if I do the thing that I know is right, it's going to signal to somebody else who's also feeling the same way I'm feeling, right? And giving them permission to say, you know what, I'm glad she did that because now that's how I was feeling too.
Yes. Yeah, it almost creates choice inside of a room,
Hmm.
right?
Yep,
There is then the opportunity to say, I don't have to just be accepting of this because someone is showing me a path to say that I do have a choice.
absolutely. That's powerful.
That is powerful. Your new book, Talk to Me Nice, centers on communication with both clarity and self respect, which is obviously already woven into what we're talking about. Why was this message the message that you felt compelled to write about now?
Yeah, I actually started thinking about this during the pandemic. I was getting up to go to the bathroom at like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? The older you get, Sonny, you have to use the bathroom more often for better or worse. And I kept thinking about what are our trust languages? If we have romantic relationships like the five, or romantic languages like the five love languages, what are those for our workplace? What are those for when things are missing? And when people tell me, oh, I don't trust my manager or I don't trust my colleague, what they're really saying is there's an expectation that's not being met. And it's less of a trust issue and more of a communication issue. And if we had the language to be able to solve for this instead of just sweeping things under the rug and steadily kind of festering and having these moments of I don't trust this person, what would it look like on the other side of that? Kind of similar to our conversation earlier, right? If I had the language to be able to articulate that, hey, I'm not trying to demonize you or shame you, but this is what I need to do my best work. And I think sometimes we don't think we have the power or the agency to be able to tell somebody is, hey, I would trust more if I had a little more transparency, a little more clarity, a little more honesty. And I wanted to give people language for that because at the end of the day, we have nothing without trust, right? No productivity. It's tied to the bottom line. And so I felt like we were trying to solve for other things in the workplace when we needed some foundational aspects to go back and say, you know what, let's get on the same page. So then we can be more productive in harmony, right?
Yes. You created the kind of the 7 trust languages, and I think they're applicable, obviously, to different situations. Would you mind going through a couple? We don't have to go through all 7, but go through a couple that you feel like are most applicable that are gonna resonate with folks.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because when I wrote this book originally for the workplace but I have so many people who will message me and say, "I'm using this at home," right? Because this is just standard language that we need to be showing up for the people that love us the most, right? Or the people that we love the most. And so just a few that I think are really important, especially in the context of how we're living in the world we're living in today. I think number 1 is that transparency. That's a trust language, and that's just clarity and honesty. If I see that there's
Mhm.
smoke coming out of the chimney, I don't need you to tell me there's nothing to see here, right? You may not know why the smoke is coming out of the chimney, but tell me, you know what? Yes, the smoke is coming out of the chimney. Let me find out why. Right now, I don't know. But once I have some additional information, I'll let you know. But I'm not going to treat you like you're crazy and that you don't hear the smoke alarms going right? So you just need a little more clarity. And a lot of people, they'll say they don't trust someone, but what they really want is just a little more honesty, right? But how do you say that? You can't just come to you and say, hey, Minda, I don't trust you anymore. You're not going to get the response that you want from me. But if we have a better conversation around clarity and honesty, then that's something that can work. I think another trust language that people really need in their toolkit these days is the language of sensitivity. That's being mindful of our
Mhm.
behaviors, our words, and our actions. So maybe 6 months ago, that joke might have been okay to say, but today do I have the right to say that to this group that's in front of me? Do I have the right to, if you are living in Southern California and there's wildfires, for me to tell you, oh, just get to your near Starbucks so you can log into the year-end review, right? No, being sensitive is saying, hey, I know I may live in New York. I know there's a lot going on right now. Do you need anything from us? Get somewhere safe. And when you're able, we can have this conversation later in the year, right? Instead of productivity, productivity. And I think that we're just forgetting about the human aspect of people, that people are human first. And, I think the other language is sensitivity. I think being mindful about our behaviors, our actions, and our words, just because a joke might be funny to us, it may not be funny to everybody in the room, right? Or just because that I believe is important may not be as important or culturally relevant to the group that I'm speaking to. So have I earned the right to say this, right? Or am I being sensitive enough, essentially empathetic, emotionally intelligent? And I think there's a lack of that in a lot of our social circles in the workplace, right? We're very passionate about something that may not be someone else may be as passionate about. And so I think that's important. And then lastly, I think follow through, just keeping our
Mhm.
word. I think oftentimes we say yes to a lot of things. I'm going to make that email introduction. And then what happens? We forget, right? Then we offer to do it again. And people are like, I can't trust you because you never do what you say you're going to do. And that even saying when I can't do it is also following up, right? And I think there's all these small erosions of trust that happen, not intentionally, but unintentionally, that we can solve for with the right language.
Yeah, I love that follow up. I've framed it for the working environment as honoring our word. Even with my
Yeah.
kids, honoring our word, right? And
Hmm.
honoring our word doesn't mean we necessarily, to your point, like if something is due by 6 p.m., honoring your word, part of that, if you're not done by 6 p.m. and you don't have that to submit, it's saying, hey, I wanted to let you know before 6 p.m. Here's the update. But when we don't do what we say we're going to do, how can, number one, other people trust us? But how can we trust ourselves? Our brain is constantly paying attention to what we're telling it and what we're exhibiting. And we, by those actions, by not following up, we prove it to be right that we aren't trustworthy.
1000%.
Going back to the sensitivity one, when you were using that reference, it really made me think about how much is self awareness woven into sensitivity and really being mindful of situations, even people. Like you said, somebody who's in LA and you're talking about wildfires, like there's a sense of self awareness you have to have as a leader, as a human, to be able to meet someone at that place where they are with a sense of sensitivity.
Yeah, and I think the lack of, right? Just because it's not you're not experiencing it or it doesn't happen to your community doesn't mean that it's not important, right? And so
Right.
if we don't what did our families used to say? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I think many leaders, they know what to say, but they almost freeze in the moment. What's happening beneath the surface when someone struggles to speak up?
Yeah, I think that's important to note because I think we've all been there, right? We don't, and especially I think in the climate that we live in, you don't want to say the wrong thing. So sometimes you
Right.
don't say anything at all, right? Or you just hope it goes away. And I think that people want us to be vulnerable. They want us to say, hey, I may not get this right every single time, but I want to make sure that your humanity and dignity is still intact and my integrity is still here. Right. So I'm always going to do the right thing. I may not say the right thing all the time, but hopefully I've put enough in the trust bank account that you understand my intentions. You've gotten to know me, and that if I do slip up, in a way that there's a way to get trust back on the tracks. But I think so many people are just like paralyzed by, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to use the wrong words? And yes, you're human. You're going to do the wrong things, right? But it's how we recover. It's how we demonstrate another trust language, our behavior over time, so that people can say, oh, that was just a one time event, but that's not how Minda typically shows up, right? And so
Mhm.
giving a little grace as well.
Yeah. I love that trust bank account. That provides a real visual of additions and withdrawals and what is your balance? And that could look differently, right? Because we all have the professional side, but we also have the personal side too. And life is life. And there will be the times where we put our foot in our mouth. But if you have enough additions or deposits in there that offsets some of those times when you have a withdrawal. I really love the reference because I'm a very visual person. So it's like, oh, I can see that. I can see exactly how that works.
Right, because we all are gonna fall short, right? We're all gonna,
That's
like,
right.
be like, "Oh," but we want them to remember, "Okay, well, typically speaking, Minda is trustworthy, right? That one time. But if I constantly demonstrate this behavior of being untrustworthy, you're not going to trust that I can do any better than what I've been showing you.
Right.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. How do power, hierarchy, and identity shape the way conversations unfold at work? And what do people often underestimate about those same dynamics?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because I do a lot of talks at different companies and workshops, and I'll have some managers say, well, that's not happening on my team. My team would tell me. And I say, would they? Would they tell you you know, what have you done to create that environment where everybody, maybe your favorites or your go-to people might have that relationship with you to be honest with you without fear of retribution, but what about the introvert over there? Or what about the
Mhm.
new person that just started on your team that may be experiencing some of these things, but they don't want, because of the power dynamics, how do you tell your manager that something isn't working? Without it seeming like a critique and or vice versa. And so I think managers or leaders in particular, we have to be self aware and emotionally intelligent to know that it takes a lot of courage for somebody to tell us the truth and tell us what they're experiencing because so many times we've seen it go left in other environments. And so I think leaders have to be the ones to role model, to be the coaches to say, this is the standard, right? Feedback, another trust language, is having a loop. So I can't be the only one that gives feedback. I have to also create the space so that everybody feels comfortable when trust is present, even how you respond. We can have a tough conversation and still keep trust at the center. We don't have to diminish each other or fear monger, right? And I think managers and leaders have to remember that they're in a position of power. And so it's important for us to give a little runway for people to say that two things can be true at the same time. Just because I have something to say or I'm experiencing micromanagement or whatever doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean I don't want to be on the team, right? But here's how we create the space where everybody feels like they're being acknowledged for their work. And if they're not, then there's space to talk about it and rectify it. Because at the end of the day, we all just want to do our best work without all the drama.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue because I wanted to ask you, how can someone advocate for themselves confidently without feeling like they're being labeled as, air quotes for those who are listening, difficult or too much?
Because we know that's real, right? We know that
Right.
if, especially, I have, there's a data point that says that some male managers don't feel comfortable giving women direct reports feedback because they don't want to seem mean, so they don't give them anything. And I say, well, that's also an erosion of trust because
Yeah.
they expect you to be advocating on their behalf in the rooms that they're not in, right? And it's a missed opportunity for growth when you don't provide people those opportunities, right? And so we have to get over those things. But what I will say is in my personal experience, I remember I had a manager and he would always call me a rock star, all these pet names that we've all heard over time. But for some reason, I still did not feel like a rock star. And I felt like
Mm.
I didn't know where I stood with him because he never gave me any feedback, no meaningful and consistent insight. And so I thought, well, if he never gives me any insight, could I really be a rock star? Or is he just, pacifying me over time? And so I created this narrative in my head that he didn't trust me. He didn't want me to be successful, that it was all lip service, right? And part of it, I had to step out of my feelings and say, wait a second, is he aware that you need feedback, Minda? Or is there an expectation that you are putting on him that he's not even aware of? And it's creating this trust narrative in your mind. So, what if you have a conversation like a big girl and say, hey, I really appreciate it when you provide me feedback after a project that I've worked on because it helps me with the next one. Is that something that we can schedule time to have those conversations so that I know that either I'm going the right way or there's some room for improvement? Is that something we can do together? And once I had that conversation with him, he's like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think you needed that. No news, good news. You're doing your thing." Right. And so, again, there was this miscommunication of he's like, you're doing your thing. I don't have to be thinking about you. And I'm saying, I do need this. Right. And once I was able to put that on the table in a way that still enhanced trust, right? Because I could have gone to him and said, you don't trust me. I can't trust you. I'm leaving. Right. I'm finding a new job. That would have got us nowhere. But at least I set an expectation and he was either going to meet me there or not. I think a lot of it is self advocacy. That's part of our control. I can't control how he responds to that, but I can control how I bring that information in fact and not feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that probably happens more than we'd care to admit, where there are these kind of perceptions in our mind that until we actually address it and say, hey, asking for the feedback, them recognizing, oh, I didn't think you needed that. And then all of a sudden you like elevate the plane of communication in that relationship in the process. And so that's a really great opportunity. Or conversely, you recognize that this person's like, no, I'm not going to give you, whatever, like kind of worst case scenario, or it doesn't work out. And that's okay too, because again, like the exploration of choice is probably the most important thing. And choice is advocacy for yourself.
It absolutely is. And, especially in a climate where it's hard to find a new job or it's a little difficult or maybe it's taking people a little bit longer, you owe it to yourself to have the conversation so you have the information on what to do next, right?
Yes.
Either this is a place for you or it's not, right? But you need to know that because if we fill in the blanks and create the story, it's probably going to be anything worse than it actually is sometimes.
Women are often coached more on how they say something versus what they're actually saying. What guidance would you have for listeners to stop self editing to the point where our message starts to get diluted?
Yeah, I think that the title of my book is called Talk to Me Nice, but trust isn't about talking to each other nice. It's about being clear. What Brene Brown says, clarity is kindness, right? When you understand what it is I need and how it's going to help me and it's going to help you, I think with, at least in my experience, I think sometimes we have something we want to say and like you said we self edit, but I think we have to also speak someone else's trust language so that they understand what it is we need, right? Because I think part of it is remembering that trust is a two-way street, right? So if I know that my manager values me keeping the camera on, maybe that's what I need to do because that signals trust, right? They want to be able to see me role modeling that behavior of having the camera on, maybe. But at the same time, let's say, for example, I have a caretaking situation and today I cannot have that camera on. Right. And so instead of allowing someone to jump to conclusions that I'm working in Tahiti, right, on the beach because my camera's off, I can use a language of maybe transparency to say, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I'm caretaking right now and my grandfather has Alzheimer's and sometimes I might have to have the camera off. I just wanted to let you know that to make it aware, right? You don't have to apologize, you don't have to give your life story. It's just saying, here are the facts, here's what I needed, and here I wanted to let you know what's going on. And then they can run off with it because sometimes I know for me, I used to be very much this person is I told you what I needed to tell you, but now I'm backpedaling. Now I'm like, does that work for you? All that kind of stuff. And I think we just have to get clear on what we want to say and then leave space for a dialogue.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me think about boundaries, right? And those boundaries that are clearly established. What does it look like to set boundaries that are clear, that are professional and respected, especially in environments that may quietly reward overextension of folks? It's the expectation, maybe.
Yeah, essentially what we're talking about, yes, we're talking about trust and communication, but really we're talking about boundaries, letting people know what good looks like to us, right? And I
Mm.
think for so long we've been working in environments where we're only concerned about what it looks like for other people, but we're doing the work. Our cup's going to be more full if we set realistic expectations for people, right? And especially those who may be in transition in a job right now and you're starting a new one or you're interviewing. I think these are the perfect opportunities to ask those questions that you wish you would have asked in your last, right? To find out, is this a space for me? Can I establish boundaries, practicing them even in the interview process, right? Even in my first 90 days, because I really think it sets the tone. And if you've been somewhere for 20 plus years, today is a good day to start boundary setting. And people will, if they're used to you saying yes to everything, they're going to be a little like taken aback, but they'll get used to it, right? Just like we all learn how to evolve and change and use different tools, they'll also realize that, again, you've already put the trust in the trust bank account. So they know you're trustworthy, but now they get to operate in your world a little bit differently.
Yeah, I love that. And setting the tone right out of the gates, especially in interview process, right?
Yeah.
It's a odd market right now. I think there's been a lot of layoffs that we've seen. And so people are doing a lot of interviews. They may be doing more than they had done previously. And so I love that you're sharing this because I think that people can really take this and apply to the next call that they have, the next interview that they have, and really say, I think about boundaries of like, what are my non negotiables? What am I willing or unwilling to accept, do, be, say, and be clear on those things. So thinking about those, writing those down, giving real thought to them so that the next conversation that you have, the next interview that you have, you really are, or heck, the next performance evaluation. It's like these can be put in. It doesn't have to be a start of a new job. It's really just kind of drawing this line to say, hey, here are my boundaries. Here, I want to be respectful of yours as well. I can't be respectful of yours if I'm not clear on what mine are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, we all want to show up for each other in the right ways, right? But sometimes we're not aware of them because we're moving 90,000 miles per hour a day in our day. So we're not thinking about how that email landed on you. We're not thinking
Yeah.
about all these things. And so sometimes we need that pause from someone else to say in a nice way, right? That enhances trust and doesn't erode trust, that here's what would be helpful next time, right? So we
Yeah.
have control over that.
For leaders listening who manage teams, who manage people, what conversations have you seen that they're avoiding that are quietly costing them trust and performance and maybe even retention?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, for those managers or leaders that are preparing for those, annual reviews, this is a great time to lean into asking the question, what does trust look like for you? I value you as an employee and I want to make sure that we have the best working relationship possible. What do you need from me to do your best work? I spent 15 years in corporate America. I never had a manager ask me that question. And not to say that I didn't have good managers, but they weren't always thinking in that way, right? And I think that's going to set the tone for they may not know what the seven trust languages are, but they're going to tell you a version of these things, right? "Oh, this is what trust looks like for me." And I think if we as leaders can know, okay, I mean, Minda told me like 10 things, but if I can do two of those things each and every day, we're going to build a better relationship. She's going to be able to do her best work, right? And I'm going to show up in the ways that I need to as her coach, right?
Hmm.
As her sponsor, whatever that is. And I think a lot of leaders forget that they are the coach, right? This is the team. People are looking
Right.
to you to set the tone, to set the plays. And if it's shaky or it's not trustworthy or we are playing favorites, then you're not going to have team cohesion and it's not going to be good for the bottom line. So trust isn't just a let's all put on our favorite robes and sing our favorite Taylor Swift songs. Trust is good for work and business, right? It's good for retention. All of these things are good. And so I think if we just get back to the human connection of this and talk to each other with that clarity and honesty, I think we're going to see our best working days ahead.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so much of that, sometimes the communication piece and outlining and getting clear with one another, sometimes that can create a sort of a conflict. I don't necessarily mean bad conflict, but I think conflict gets a bad reputation.
Yeah.
What would you say is the difference between destructive, unhealthy conflict and the kind of what I refer to as like a healthy conflict that actually builds stronger leadership, stronger culture?
Yeah, I think that's a great call out because there is going to be conflict in the workplace. There is going to be tension. That's just the nature of life and changes that happens within leadership. But with that change and with that conflict, can I still keep trust at the center? Right? I may not have all the answers. I may not be able to tell you all the things, but I still want you to not be ruminating or crashing out throughout your day trying to figure it out. Let's have some open dialogue. When I have answers, I'll provide them. But if you have questions, you can ask them, right? And I think that leaders have some kind of put themselves in this like kind of ivory tower. Well, don't ask me anything. Even if you see that your colleague is laid off yesterday, just keep working, right? Nobody can function that way. Acknowledge, yes. Tina, who's been here for 40 years, she was like, oh, I understand you're all feeling something right now. Let's have a conversation about that. Here are some resources if you need someone to speak to about this, but let's not pretend that winter isn't coming, if you're Game of Thrones fan, or that things aren't happening, that we can. Because listen, even if a layoff is coming or a reorg is taking place, people feel better if you're honest to a in a point where it helps them make it to 5 a little bit clear, right? We're humanizing that these things are, do bother us, and we are wondering if we're next, right? Acknowledging some of those things, even when they're hard conversations, people will run over hot coals for you when you're honest. I know my best managers, right? Even with hard conversations, if I could still trust them at the end of that conversation, it made me want to keep showing up. And I think that that's what managers don't realize is that you're going to get the best out of your employees when you have a relationship, a good working relationship with them. And that starts with communication.
Yeah. And I think when there is any sort of, whether it healthy or unhealthy conflict, emotions can sometimes run a little high. And we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, but what does it look like in those real tense conversations when emotions are running high to really tap into that emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think it's critical, right? Because, for example, I keep going back to feedback because I think that's something that a lot of people have like top of mind sometimes in the workplace, right? Because feedback can feel like criticism or micromanagement or a gift that you don't want. And I think that part of that is even when I give you tough feedback or there's conflict that arises, can we still have a conversation where you don't leave wanting to cuss me out?
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like we can still have a tough conversation and have our humanity in check, right? I don't have to talk down to you, right? I don't have to make you feel bad for coming to me about this. Or if I don't agree with something you've given to me, then I can say, you know what, let me process what you said. Right now, I don't have the answer to that at the moment. Let me think about what that is. Can we schedule a follow up call tomorrow once I process? Or we're having this conversation and there's some information that you're not aware of. I'd like to provide you with that. Can I forward you some emails? And then we can have a better conversation because whoever brought you this information, they weren't there for our January 25th call. And so this might bring a little more context, right? Instead of those emotions. And you say, okay, great. I would love more information on that, right? We could still have a conversation that's not rooted in, like you said, that unhealthy tension, right? And I think that that's the part of it because people, we don't all have the same tools in our toolkit. And when anybody like challenges us, then we get defensive. And so I would encourage us to listen to what people are saying because at the end of the day, there's some information that you need, and you're not going to get that being tense or defensive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've talked a lot about communication, talked a lot about trust. How does communication and or trust or the lack of it directly impact career trajectory, especially for women, especially for underrepresented leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, first of all, we have to realize that trust doesn't look the same for everybody. We could have trust at 9 a.m. in the morning and somebody says or does something and trust is gone by 9:07, right? But oftentimes there's no space to be able to talk about those, right? We sweep them under the rug. And so sometimes people think that trust is the grand acts of betrayal, but sometimes it's the small, quiet moments that go unsaid, right?
Mm.
Uh, Last year, maybe your company said that we want to make sure that women are in more leadership positions. And then later, women see that there's no Women History Month. What does that signal to the people who were hoping that what you said was true 6 months before, right? What's that going to do for me as a woman or a person of color if we don't have these cultural celebration days anymore, right? If you said that this is a place that is for everybody, right? So we have to understand how these things land on other people. And I think, again, there's been sometimes no space to be able to talk about those things. And I think this is so important to acknowledge that we might all work at the same place, but we don't experience the workplace the same. And so, what would it look like to see someone and acknowledge that that is true? And we want to make sure that we're doing and behavioring and demonstrating behavior where even if we do have to change names of programming or we're doing something that people still feel like they're valued here. And I think that's part of it, right? We don't need an initiative for everybody to feel like this is a place that they can succeed, but you have to
Right.
demonstrate that behavior.
Yeah. I'm curious, as we've talked about all of this and in the process of writing Talk to Me Nice, how has that changed the way you show up in conversations, in coaching, going through that process yourself and really probably taking a lot of lived experience and putting it down on paper for others to experience?
I love this question because talk to me nice. I'm constantly, every time I talk about it, I'm putting a mirror up to my own face, right? Because I'm talking about the trust and trustworthy behavior. And so I also have to reflect on myself. I remember recently a friend of mine was telling me that they were having a really tough time at work. And when you're a workplace consultant, you become like everybody, every friend has, you're the coach for that, right? Like, and they were telling me, oh, Minda, I'm having this issue. How would you feel if that happened to you? And I said, I wouldn't care about that because I would just move on with my day, right? And I had to stop in my tracks and practice the language of sensitivity because that wouldn't bother
Mhm.
me, but it's clearly bothering this person. And I think sometimes we say things like that, right? And in that moment, that could have eroded trust with that person to say, I can't have these conversations with Minda anymore because she doesn't get it. I stopped and I apologized. And I said, you know what? That wouldn't bother me, but we are 2 different people. So tell me more about this. Let's talk about what's a conversation that you could have to make this better for you at work. And I think these are the things that it's those small little moments, right? That we have to check ourselves to say, okay, this may not be important to me. I may not need follow through. I'm fine. I may not need transparency, but somebody needs it from you, right? And remembering that trust is a two-way street.
Yeah. No, that's really it's interesting. Sometimes we catch ourselves. It might have just fallen out of our mouth and we're like, "Ah, hold on a
Yeah.
second." My son and I have been working on something recently where he's like, "Really, mom? Like you tell me not to make comments after, something." And so we've been doing that a lot lately. It'll pop out and we're like, "Oh, okay, you know what? That I said I wasn't going to make a comment." And I did, and so I'm sorry. And but it's funny, it's my 14-year-old and I we're working on this together. But
And that's
it's
what it
that
is.
sensitivity. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We're all a work in progress. That's what I tell people. It's not about being perfect, but it's about are we getting better, right? Is there room for growth? And I think if we all start from that place, then we can talk to each other a little bit better.
that's right. Well, if listeners could take just one courageous communication shift from this conversation into their next meeting, into their next conversation or boundary setting moment, what what would you want it to be?
Yeah. I just want each and every one of us to think before I say this, before I do this, before I send this email, is this going to enhance trust with the person on the other end or erode it? And I think if we ask that simple question for the things that we do and say, we'll all show up a lot better and trust will always be at the center, right? And even when we do it wrong, we get to follow back up because that's the courageous part, right? To acknowledge that I did do it wrong, but I'm committed to showing you that I can be better. And if we all remember that and humanize each other, I think that we're more alike than not because I think we all want that humanity and that grace.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's something that I'm going to take. I like to put stickies that are in my purview. But that way, as we're engaging in meetings, that's in front of us, and so that's going to be another sticky on my computer because I do think that's really important. And I feel like it's a sense of responsibility. But sometimes when it's not, when we're rushing through the day and a lot going on, we may not think through that. And so I would encourage people put that sticky on your computer, put it somewhere where it's in front of you because that really will serve both you and those that you engage with.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to, on top of all that we've talked about of being an author and a speaker and a coach and doing so many things, you have clearly a very creative side. As we talked about, it's the gift or curse type of creativity, but you have 3 short films that are currently being shown in festivals. I would love for you to share a little bit more about that for folks who want to explore those.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was telling you I am like the mad scientist. And so as an author, I am a storyteller, as a public speaker, a storyteller. And a lot of people won't read books, but they like to watch TV and film. And so I decided to take some of the stories and the lessons and create them in short film format so that people get to experience what those things are that we're talking about in a different medium. And so I'm excited about, some of one just stay tuned. Go to mindaharts.com, see where a festival is in your area, and hopefully one day you'll see me on your screen when you're watching one of the streaming platforms.
That's no, that's so that's amazing. So congratulations just on all of your success and but more so congratulations on really taking all of your lived experiences and using them, putting them in different mediums where it helps other people navigate the things that they're going through. When maybe they may feel very alone or like no one else understands or no one else has traveled down this path and in hearing this, in reading your book and hearing you speak, people know that they're not alone. And so I love that you're sharing your wisdom with the world.
Well, thank you for doing the same.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, there's one question that I love to ask at the end of the podcast. And that is, if it were your last day on earth, and of all of the experiences you've had and the wisdom that you've acquired, you could only impart one piece of advice or guidance on the world, what would that be?
That's a heavy question, but an important question. I would just say trust is a choice, and trust
Mm.
isn't a one time event, but a lifestyle.
Love it. Mic drop.
Thank you.
We're going to have everything in the show notes, but I would love for you to share, where can people find you, follow you, pick up a copy of the book?
Yeah, so go to mindaharts.com, and from there you can do all the things. Follow me on your favorite social media platforms. And also, I partnered with Google Labs, and I am one of their trust AI coaches. So if you have a situation that you need some help with, go to the Google Labs website and click on my icon, and we can talk through some of your trust issues, and we can help problem solve so you're enhancing and not eroding.
Oh, that's awesome. It has been an absolute delight to speak with you. I feel like we could probably go on and on and on, but I really appreciate you making time to come on, sharing your wisdom, sharing all that you've gone through with my audience. I know that there are probably a lot of people taking copious notes throughout this. So thank you. I appreciate you and I appreciate your time.
I appreciate you too. Thank you so much.